Like millions of other Americans, Addie fell victim to an integrated system of fraud where mortgage brokers were rewarded for cheating their customers, and where mortgage lenders took mammoth bonuses for mortgages they knew would never be repaid, and where Wall Street CEOs would report ungodly profits and pay out extravagant bonuses by buying back toxic loans only to repackage them and sell them off to unwitting customers. In between, there was a corrupted system of appraisers, underwriters, and ratings agencies that rubber-stamped it all because if they didn't, they would never see a paycheck again. It took this entire system to push Addie out of her home of 40 years, and in this place, squeeze every last remaining cent out of her. But Addie Polk was just one of millions of people whose lives were devastated by these crimes, caught up in a tidal wave of suffering like hadn't been seen in nearly a century. And as the pain grew, so did the outrage.
All week, occupy Wall Street! All day, all week, occupy Wall Street! USA! 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 USA!
The rise of the Tea Party and the Occupy movements after the financial crisis made one thing very clear. The country was mad as hell, and nobody could agree at who. People on the left pointed the finger at Wall Street. People on the right pointed the finger at Washington. So who was really to blame? As it turns out, both. To answer the question as to why this is the case is to answer the question of what really caused 2008. But if we want to understand the present, we have to look to the past, to the time when the nation last suffered this same kind of economic anguish, the Great Depression.
If you look at the blunt facts of the Great Depression, you had several thousand banks fail. You had unemployment of 25%. I mean, you had people literally starving, right, and living in tar paper shacks in Central Park and things like that. So the level of suffering was truly, astounding.
There were hearings that were set up by the Senate to try to get to the bottom of what had happened, what had caused the crash, was there wrongdoing? And there was an individual by the name of Ferdinand Pecora that was an immigrant that became an attorney. He started the hearings.
He had dealt with organized crime. He wasn't an expert on banking, didn't have to be. He was an expert on scams. And so he did the questioning. Continuous, sophisticated, relentless.
They basically determined in the hearings that the large banks were manipulating the economy, that they were taking bad loans and they were selling those to unsuspecting investors. That truly was the forerunner of what is today known as mortgage-backed securities.
All of this had been successfully covered up. Powerful folks don't want people inquiring, and usually Congress doesn't inquire about the wealthy. Pecora did so successfully, documented abuse after abuse after abuse, and the public was outraged at the bankers, and the bankers were discredited.
Senate investigations were making headlines. It was J.P. Morgan on the grill, telling the senators, yes, his banking house had $250 million in the till, and no, he had not paid an income tax in the last 2 years.
Armed with the findings of the Pecora hearings and the overwhelming support of the American public, President Franklin Roosevelt was swift in holding bankers accountable for their actions, standing up to Wall Street in a way that was unprecedented in the country's history.
We had to struggle with the old enemies of peace, business and financial monopoly. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
You just don't hear modern politicians willing to be that bold and take on powerful folks in that way. So people were ready for a change.
This unprecedented public outrage, combined with equally unprecedented boldness from Washington against elite crime, led to a series of massive reforms that overhauled the way Wall Street was allowed to do business and put cops on the beat who would make sure the banks never went back to their old ways. This amounted to one of the single greatest instances of Washington policy aligning with the will of the American people in the history of the nation.
After the Great Depression, the United States put in a bunch of rules and regulations that, interestingly enough, regulated the financial industry more than at any time in all of history. Regulated them like crazy. And what happened? The United States built the most prosperous and largest middle class in the history of the world. The country as a whole prospered, and interestingly, finance prospered.
We have this 50 years of really strong economic growth, in which the frequency of recessions is reduced by more than half compared to what had been true in our history, such that people are able to get jobs in which they can support a family on those wages, and they can buy a home. And it's within their ability to keep that home for 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
It was this period of economic stability that allowed Addie and Robert Polk to buy their home, a small part of the American dream that would always be theirs, so long as the lessons learned from the Great Depression were never forgotten.
People often said the bankers of the 1940s and 50s, and even into the early 60s, were naturally conservative because the people at the top survived the Great Depression. They saw what happened to banks that took big risks. Well, that generation was gone by the mid-1960s. So that, by the 1980s, memories of the Great Depression have faded.
Hey all, become that person nobody dares to argue with. Hit like, subscribe, and that little bell button for notifications. Talk to you soon.